think everybody's kind of worried that it's going too fast, worried about whether it's really, there's any control going on. Every time we upgrade the system and we figure out a way of solving a problem, it makes it more obvious that we were doing it wrong for years before that. And just how wrong we were doing it depends on how much you fly over the area or you get around and work at other places.
Our understanding of what we're calling the temperate rainforest ecosystem and the associated marine systems is just extraordinarily limited. It's, here we have what is essentially a life support system which has evolved over thousands of years. It has the ability or the capability to support a myriad of life forms simultaneously, something which we can't even begin to think about doing. And we are threatening that entire system. I mean, in fact, I think it's probably in a crisis stage now. We have this opportunity to begin to understand the dynamics of how this system works, to understand essentially, life support systems which have evolved over thousands of years to work. And not only do these systems work, they actually produce products which are useful to us, trees, salmon, and so on. So considering that this is the ecosystem which is supported, I mean, if we just look at the self-interest side of this, has supported the people and the economy of British Columbia for years, and there's only a tiny little piece of it left, it seems it would make sense to both protect it and begin to try to understand it, just in case all of our best laid plans for industrial tree farms and everything else, salmon farms and stream enhancement, all the other things we're doing to the environment here don't happen to work. And at this point, there's no proof whatsoever that they will work in the long run.
Tell you a little bit about what I have seen as I have grown up here on Vancouver Island. The fisheries, for example, the resource of the fishery, that has been really devastated, in my opinion, through destruction of salmon habitat in the forest industry. That, along with, I suppose, the offshore drift net fishery, which has an impact on it, but more so the clear-cut logging practices. Because right now, in many areas, through, I guess, coastal British Columbia, where this clear-cut logging has occurred, you can go into many places where there were streams where you could walk through and there would be water flowing all year around, whether it had been raining or not. But with the clear-cut extending from the banks of those rivers on up to the top of some mountains, in many cases, you can walk in those rivers and those riverbeds and not even get wet. And that tells you a story right there, what happened to those fish. Because it takes the people who depend on those resources, say, about 7 years to feel the effects of the clear-cut logging, because you still have the returning cycles of salmon from the previous years. So when the last one comes, there's no more, and then suddenly the Indian people are taking too many fish. It's crazy. We didn't take too many fish at all. It's destruction of salmon habitat. One of the greatest concerns of the New Channel peoples.
Now we're at a creek that runs into Kennedy Lake, right where the Alberni to Fino Highway comes along beside the lake. It's a creek which has been, as we say, blown out by flash floods caused by logging. The mountains behind were all clear-cut over a very short period of time in the 60s and 70s, and the result was the peak flows of the winter storms were much higher. They came roaring down here, completely wiped out much of the stream habitat that originally sustained the salmon. And in speaking to the elders from the Clayoquot band, one in particular I spoke to, who'd been a fisherman for 50 years, said he can remember when he was a child coming fishing on Kennedy Lake and seeing the runs of salmon that came up all these creeks that run into Kennedy Lake along the east side. And there isn't a fish that comes back into these streams now. They've been the runs have been basically wiped out by the flash floods and the erosion. This particular creek that we're on is running right here, but I've just walked down towards the lake, and in fact it disappears into the gravel bed just down here. So basically, because of this huge amount of rock and gravel which has been washed down the stream bed by the floods, it swallows up the water flow. So in many cases there isn't enough water for the salmon to swim back up anyway, and the habitat is no longer suitable for them to spawn in. And of course there are continuous floods occurring off the hills in the autumn when the salmon would want to spawn. So basically they can't get established. And since the run is wiped out, any further presence of salmon in this stream is dependent upon a casual vagrant from another run happening to find this stream. That process may take hundreds, thousands of years, who knows. And it would be dependent on the forests behind that are part of the watershed here for this creek being allowed to recover, being allowed to regain a grip on the soil and to prevent the floods that occur.
What sort of reduction have you seen in the fishery then since you were a kid, do you think? As opposed to, say, numbers. It sounds like it was pretty heavy here one time. It must have been a lot like the Port Alberni run. Yes, so there's been a major reduction in returning stocks. There's so few chums return here now that they haven't had a fishery here for possibly 10 years, a chum fishery, and there hasn't been a commercial sockeye fishery for it'll be 22 years this month since they had a sockeye fishery in 1971.
I believe that many, many British Columbians, Canadians, and indeed people from around the world recognize the profound importance of saying that we have seen too much destruction. We have seen too many massive clear-cuts. We know that there are only 6 major unlogged old-growth temperate rainforest watersheds left on Vancouver Island out of 91. We know that this is a global heritage as well, that there has been global destruction of rainforests, both temperate and tropical. And I believe that the vision and the courage that you are demonstrating today by standing here and saying to the government of British Columbia, to the government of Canada, that we've had enough. That there are generations yet to come that are not here. And I look around and I see we have all generations here. We have young children and we have elderly people, but most importantly, future generations. And what we're asking of our government is to demonstrate vision, to demonstrate leadership. They showed that vision and that leadership in saving the Tatsunshini. Do the same in Clayoquot Sound. Yes. Do the same.